Oh, hi! Didn't see you there. You got me shrinking myself and observing the beauty of nature. Yeah, you see, I found this piece of a white dwarf star that allows me to shrink. And if you think that sounds ridiculous, well, that's just the origin of the atom. Let's talk about how crazy the atom could be sometimes. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. We've taken a look at several very silly Golden Age comics on this program in the past. And hey, yeah, the industry was exploding, so it's no surprise that a lot of publishers and artists were just throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. At the same time, a lot of those early Golden Age comics that survived, the characters that endured, would cover some pretty serious topics from time to time. It was really the Silver Age of comics. After the Comics Code Authority came in, that all of a sudden there was a rebirth of superhero stuff. There was a lot more sci-fi and a lot more wacky stuff going on. It wasn't quite as serious in general. I'm talking broad, high-level stuff. So it's perhaps no surprise that you can find some pretty funny stories in the Silver Age of comics. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at that tiny titan of a superhero, the Atom. And folks, I think I found a pretty bonkers story that I want to cover with you. But before we do that, let me first tell you just a little bit about his co-creators, writer Gardner Fox and artist Gil Kane. The Atom was co-created by writer Gardner Fox and artist Gil Kane in issue 34 of Showcase in October of 1961. Editor Julia Schwartz is also credited with co-creating and co-plotting the first issue. Interestingly, early fanzine writer Jerry Bales wrote a pitch to DC Comics in December of 1960 with input from writer Roy Thomas on an idea for DC to update their Golden Age hero, the Atom. That character did not change size, though. Bales and Thomas suggested combining the powers of the Quality Comics hero Doll Man with the Atom. Writer Gardner Fox wrote back to Bales on January 1st of 1961 and said, quote, "An Atom book may get underway in the next month or so. I am trying to cook up some new superpowers for him. Your own suggestions are excellent, and most especially the one about the atomic compression of his body, which is to be a feature of the new Atom. I have seen art samples of how he will look," end quote. Julia Schwartz wrote to Bales on January 6th, telling him that DC was already working on a new version of the Atom, and Gil Kane had designed a new outfit for him. Gardner Fox was a prolific Golden Age writer, especially at DC. He co-created characters including the original Flash, Jay Garrick, Barbara Gordon, who would go on to become Batgirl, and other Golden Age heroes like Hawkman, Dr. Fate, Zatanna. Other important stories by Fox included creating the team-up book Justice Society of America, and then also creating Justice League of America. He also introduced the idea of the multiverse in DC Comics with 1961's famous comic, The Flash of Two Worlds. Artist Gil Kane, meanwhile, was one of the best artists of his day, working in comics from the 1940s through the 1990s. Aside from the Atom, he is noted for co-creating the Silver Age version of Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, as well as Marvel characters like Iron Fist and Adam Warlock, both with writer Roy Thomas. Kane also had a well-received run on Spider-Man and created an early version of the graphic novel with His Name is Savage in 1968. What I want to relay is that Fox and Kane gave a lot to comic books. They created a lot of characters that endure to this day. But there's something that Gardner Fox's writing would be noted for, and that is that he tended to emphasize plot over character development. Just to be clear, I think that was very common for this time across all the superhero comics. What I mean is that while the characters were believable, you would often have a status quo reset at the end of a simple adventure every issue. Each month, there wasn't that much changing in the character's day-to-day life unless there was a whole new version of that character introduced. Anyway, with all that in mind, let's take a look at what I would consider to be one of the wackiest stories featuring the Atom. This is issue 34 of the Atom from December of 1967. As you can see, the story is credited to Gardner Fox with art by Gil Kane and inker Sid Green. This is a Gil Kane trope, by the way. Lots of floating heads in the background. You can see that, for instance, in a lot of his Spider-Man stories later on. It introduces a new team of supervillains for the Atom to face, and they're all based on the idea of something big, a natural opposite to the Atom's tiny stature. The best superheroes often have villains who are their opposite in some way. For instance, Superman is very powerful, whereas Lex Luthor is very smart. Or you might have a character like Bizarro, who's some sort of weird monster version of Superman. You might look at a character like Spider-Man and feature a character like Dr. Octopus, who is also a scientist like Peter, but one who let his scientific urges get the better of him and it took him down a dark path. You've also got characters like, say, Venom or Carnage that look like a mirror version of Spider-Man. The Atom didn't really have any classic villains that were a good opposite to him. He had one guy named Kronos who liked to deal with just timing his crimes out very well. There was a person called the Bug-Eyed Bandit who was just really good at stealing things and had a mechanical bug. Our story begins in a headquarters with the supervillain team that we're about to meet, and the leader introduces himself saying, "Now that you've agreed to join our big gang, let me introduce you to our fellow members. First of all, I'm Big Head, leader of the gang." This guy is not a mutant, he just has a really big head, and he decided to own it. So, more power to you, King. The team includes Big Ben, who is described as an expert at synchronizing time schedules. And we also meet Big Wig, whose power is he owns wigs. There's Big Bertha, she's strong. And there's Big Shot. And Big Head specifically says, "Big Shot, who makes his special guns talk a language all their own." I have to admit, personally, I got excited at this point thinking that that meant that his guns literally talked. No, they're just guns. And of course there's Big Cheese, who concocts cheeses with extraordinary powers. Since you're a stage magician and a card sharp, I'm going to name you Big Deal. Writer Gardner Fox was noted for being what's called a polymath, as in an expert in a lot of different subjects. He was known for having tons of research magazines and encyclopedias and books. He liked to be an expert on history and nature and science, all that kind of stuff. I really think that this is the kind of guy that was going through that reference material, found a bunch of references to Big Blank, and said, yeah, that's enough for a story. The big gang has a gimmick. They steal all the big stuff in the world. For instance, they have stolen the world's biggest book. It's apparently called The National Story. I will note that the cover design is rather lacking considering the size that the artist would have had to work with. This is not a sculpture, it's a literal book that's about the size of 10 men. I'm not really sure who would be able to take advantage of that. They've also stolen things like the world's largest drum. What would anybody do with props this large? It's almost as though they might factor into the story later on rather than be of actual value to a gang that steals. Big Deal has a good point here. Drums? Bells? Organs? Don't you big gang guys go for cashable stuff? Like the biggest money heist of all time? Haha! We've already pulled that one off! Big Head explains they're about to steal 3 things from Ivy Town, and Big Deal is justifiably concerned that that's where the Atom operates out of. To that, Big Head says it's time to hear the plan, but the plan seems to have been invented by Big Ben, who starts explaining the details. Big Head's leadership seems to be limited exclusively to micromanaging Big Ben, as in saying, "Come up with a plan, Big Ben," and Big Ben comes up with the plan for the rest of the gang. Thanks, Big Head. Great idea. One of the big gang slams their hand down on the table, and you can see that the coffee cup and saucer actually look quite small. Well, the narration box explains that, saying, "Are these members of the big gang really as gigantic as we've portrayed them thus far?" And the next panel explains, "No! For even as Big Deal fans out a pack of cards to perform a trick, the hideout is actually filled with special small-sized furniture to make these midgets appear big." I know that's not the best word or term, we don't really use it anymore, but this was 1967. That said, these people are all of normal height. Apparently they just want to feel bigger. I don't know, maybe you'd feel bigger if you didn't steal gigantic books and stand next to them. Just an idea. We now cut to Ivytown, where a lawyer named Jean Loring is reading from a will to a family. Over there to the right, that's Ray Palmer. He is secretly the Atom. His girlfriend is Jean Loring, the lawyer. She is bequeathing the items that a dead relative has left to this family, which includes the world's largest emerald. Jean Loring has her boyfriend just hanging out while she reads a will to this family dealing with grief. I must have missed that day of law school where you could just invite your friends over while reading a will. While everybody fawns over the beautiful emerald, the big gang make their move. And first up, we see team member Big Cheese. Now, if you thought that his name was some sort of metaphor, no, it's very literal. He actually makes cheeses that are so stinky that they knock people out. Ray Palmer thinks fast. As he's passing out, he decides to pass out behind a screen and use that cover to shrink down to the atom. What is Ray's logic? He thinks to himself, I can shrink small enough to avoid the full effect of those fumes. I'm no scientist, but to me that sounds like the opposite of what would actually happen if you were smaller. For instance, a child compared to an adult, wouldn't fumes affect you more? It doesn't matter. He shrinks. That's his power. That's how he escapes the stinky cheese. Oh, and why am I wearing a different t-shirt? Because my video file got corrupted, so I'm re-recording the middle for you. Let's go. The Atom thinks to himself that he's already heard of the big gang, and then he runs past everybody else who's passed out and thinks, Gene and the others will come too after a while. It'll be safe enough to leave them here. Personally, if a friend of mine passed out, I would actually stay with them and be sure that they could wake up, but hey, I'm not a superhero like the Atom. As the big gang make their escape, Atom leaps into action and kicks Big Head right in his big dome. Big Ben planned on the Atom finding them out on their second heist and is absolutely stunned that he is breaking up their first crime. Of course, we know that it's sheer luck. Big Wig gets ready to throw his wig at the Atom, but he's quickly knocked out. Seriously, a wig? What's such a big deal about a wig? I totally underestimated how dangerous wigs are! Big Shot aims his stupid gun at the Atom, but the Atom kicks a piece of cheese into it, and that's enough to stop it from working. And Big Ben is so obsessed with his time gimmick that he's staring at his watch while the Atom makes short work of his teammates, and that just allows the Atom to kick him in the head as well. In the next panel, the Atom is knocking out Big Deal, but that really isn't much of a big deal since playing cards are really not much of a weapon. Cut to Big Bertha, who's holding a shot put and estimating that the Atom is about 50 feet away. She hurls the shot put with surprisingly deadly accuracy. It whacks the Atom and he goes flying into a nearby pond, sinking. The big gang gather around the pond and are convinced that the Atom is absolutely dead. Later, back at their headquarters, they waste time talking about their gimmicks. For instance, Big Cheese says, "Tell me, Big Wig, where do you buy those headpieces?" "Buy 'em? Are you kidding? I steal these, man. These wigs are part of my swag." The next several panels involve Big Ben going over their plan and Big Head just agreeing that, yeah, that's their plan, to steal 2 more things. We cut back to the Atom, who has survived. It's never explained exactly how, other than he says that he was so light it didn't actually hurt him. So basically, he just lucked out. Ray runs back to check on his girlfriend Jean and is thinking to himself, what possible excuse can I give her? But Jean just says, "Oh, there you are. I was so worried that those gangsters had taken you along as a hostage. Why didn't I think of that? Oh my goodness, you're all wet. Those crooks threw you in the lake." "I guess my secret identity is safe enough as long as Jean asks and answers her own questions." Ray decides to pretend that he's caught an immediate cold after being tossed into the pond, and Jean insists on escorting him home. Ray sneaks out at night and goes to the library to try to figure out what the big gang could be going after next. Meanwhile, his girlfriend Jean is calling for him every 15 minutes, but he's not answering, so she's starting to worry. I don't really have a joke here. It's just fascinating to see how much this single aspect has changed in our lives, because you'd never have to go to a library these days if you didn't want to. You could look things up on your own phone. Similarly, you could call or text somebody. You wouldn't have to just use a rotary phone and try every 15 minutes and just wonder, are they there? Are they asleep? Did they go out? It's just a very different world. The big gang hangs outside of a millionaire's house, and just as he goes to check his doors to make sure they're locked for the night, they electrocute him, although it really looks like they're just shooting him in the dick. Finally, Big Deal finally gets his moment to shine as he tosses a playing card onto the millionaire's safe, and it melts the safe. If Big Head was so smart, you'd think he could invent these playing cards and stinky cheeses, but whatever, he's got a team of 6, and they break into the safe and steal the world's largest stamp. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, the rest of the team has split up and they are stealing the world's largest coin, which is actually a large piece of rock. And the Adam shows up and he thinks to himself how the stone coin from the Pacific island of Yap weighs almost 200 pounds. That's a small example of what I meant when I said that Gardner Fox was a really smart guy, because the island of Yap actually is a small part of the Federated States of Micronesia out in the South Pacific. So yeah, that is somewhat plausible. The Atom quickly punches out Big Wig, who crashes into Big Bertha. Big Ben tries to attack the Atom with a lamp, but the Atom apparently knows lamp kung fu and pivots it and throws Big Ben into the wall. As mundane as that sounds, I have to admit, Gil Kane finds a way to make that look extremely dynamic. Big Shot shows up with his special gun and says, "Your small size won't protect you for long against my razor-sharp propellers, Atom." But the Atom actually does jump over those razor-sharp propellers quite easily. Not that I'm looking to give a criminal any good advice, but I would have to tell Big Shot if I was talking to him that instead of shooting these razor propellers and stuff, he might want to try an actual gun. There seems to be a lot of statistics on how well they work. Big Head is just about to stomp on the Atom, which would be a pretty ignominious way to go out, but the Atom pulls the rug out from under Big Head and he gets shot with one of Big Ben's big balls. I know, phrasing, but that's really what happens. The Atom easily knocks out Big Shot, but oh no, Big Cheese is coming back with a new stinky cheese. Yeah, the Atom just knocks that into his face. The Atom is now busy dodging playing cards thrown by Big Deal. Why bother? The Atom then almost misses the fact that Big Wig is standing behind him and throws a wig, and it explodes. It's a good thing that the wig I defeated earlier today was just a normal wig and not one of those exploding wigs.
You saved the day, Big Wig. One where the rest of us failed.
You blew the Atom to smithereens. There's not even a trace of him left. But all the Atom did was shrink so small that the explosion didn't hurt him. Apparently that took him a while to shrink though, because now the Atom says that the bad guys have gotten away. He heads home and sees that his girlfriend is knocking on his apartment door, so he slips under the doorway as the Atom and opens it up as Ray Palmer saying, "Hey, sorry, just not feeling well, I'm sick." This is a little bit of an example of what I was talking about with Silver Age comics, where the status quo was always the same. Yes, there is individual tension in a story if somebody has to protect their secret identity, but if you think about it long term, if somebody has a serious girlfriend that they're considering proposing to and stuff, you'd think that, hey, let's share that. And I have to give a lot of the superhero TV shows and movies credit. These days, they don't necessarily try to hide that secret identity as much, and I don't think that they need to. Share that with the people that you know and love. They'd probably think it's pretty cool. Apparently, the big gang pulled off another heist because they now drive a truck into some gigantic caverns, and they talk about how they stole the world's largest piece of silver. However, the Atom figured it all out. He shows up and again kicks Big Head in the back of his head. As the Atom leapt into battle, we can see him think through his plan of attack, that he had reasoned that they had to hide their loot somewhere nearby, that they wouldn't want to rent a place, so they must be using these giant caverns. The Atom is good at guessing. And we've already seen the Atom punch people, so now he decides to use some gimmicks to defeat people. He opens the gigantic book and squashes a bunch of the big gang. Then he jumps in the drum and runs in it like a treadmill, rolling right over them. And then we quickly cut to 2 panels that tell us that everything is all over and the Atom is giving his account to the press. Case closed. And that was it for the big gang. I'm afraid Big Cheese and Big Wig never made any further appearances. Too bad. Obviously, seeing people throw wigs and cheese is lots of fun. I would have loved to have seen them go up against Batman or Hawkman or Green Lantern. That would have been a blast. Anyway, I have to say, as goofy as it is, this story moves fast, so it is fun, and the artwork is incredible. I don't think Gil Kane ever hacked out anything. He always produced something exciting and dynamic, just an incredible, incredible illustrator. If you are curious about checking out their work, for Gil Kane, I would specifically point you towards Green Lantern. I think he did an excellent job on that, and his work on Spider-Man. I think that those are 2 great versions of his artwork. And for Gardner Fox, I think some of the most fun stuff you can find there is his Justice League of America run, because that's when you start seeing things like the multiverse and the crisis events. He would come up with an annual crisis where the Justice Society from one dimension and the Justice League from another dimension always had to team up against a big villain. Those are really fun, actually. A little dated, but still super, super fun. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this lighter episode. Next week, I have something a lot more in-depth about just a total bonkers weirdo in the comics industry that worked from the Golden Age through the 1980s. Just a fascinating weirdo. I cannot wait to share that with you all. By the way, if you have a moment, please remember to hit things like and subscribe. That super helps this channel. That helps it grow by helping the YouTube algorithm. It recommends the video to new people. So that helps me a lot. And also, just know that I also do a weekly live show every Monday for about 2 hours. That's on my second channel, Pros and Cons. So I'll have the link in the description below. But I'll review all the comics that I read in the past week, as well as talk about the comic book news of the week. And then sometimes I do fun things like this past week, I did the Sprite Challenge. I told a pretty epic and super embarrassing poop story. And I always draw something as well. So there's a lot of fun on those live shows. I hope you'll consider checking those out. But anyway, that's plenty from me. Thanks so much for just hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. And until I see you next time, keep reading comics. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks.